Dr. Jazz.
No, I wanted to jump
Dr.
in just like
Jazz.
asking you about the latest one. I followed you for a long time since Screenwash came out, which is what, 18 years ago, I guess. So,
Wow.
and but I want to ask you about Portrait in
Yeah.
Extreme, your last one. And I've read the liner notes on Bandcamp and listened to it, and it's such a diverse project you've done, of course, during this strange lockdown period. But like, how did that one happen? And especially, where does your interest in so many varieties come from? There's like almost Led Zeppelin-ish vibe with chords, then you go in some Ben Monderish that's so many B stuff and strings and everything. I mean, if you can tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I mean, for everybody, it was really, really strange times, and I was kind of almost, I'd almost stopped practicing and everything. I'd ground to a with it really, and I was just doing other things at the time. But I started to really miss being involved with music, so I was really lucky that I got a grant from the Irish Arts Council. I'm living in the west of Ireland now, and so I got a grant. It was called Expand Your Practice. So you could basically choose something that you wanted to learn, and I was interested in using some form of electronics. I didn't really know what that was going to be, but I spoke to a few friends who were involved with that kind of territory, and one person recommended I get to grips with something called Ableton Suite 11. So I had a few tutorials as part of the whole process with a great friend of mine called Alex Bonney, who's a trumpet player, but he's also into electronic music, and he's a great sound engineer. And I just started to use it and put things together. And I mean, it really was a mixture of things. I just tried out all sorts of different sounds. So I was learning as I went, kind of thing, and I got some very basic home recording stuff together. I borrowed my friend's bass, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Gave me a whole new, not a new, but a renewed respect for bass players, especially trying to play the fast swing track. But yeah, no, it was just a real fun project. But I always loved all kinds of diverse things. I mean, like so many guitar players, I started as a rock guitarist. I was massively into Black Sabbath when I was a
Oh,
kid
really?
and
Oh,
stuff
wow.
like
Okay.
yeah, yeah, still am. But I always loved all kinds of things. And my first teacher actually was, real serious teacher was a guy called John Richards. And he was a session player who had done things like kink sessions and all kinds of stuff in his time, along with Jimmy Page and other people that did that. And he kind of really encouraged me to play lots of different styles as well, and to learn different things. So I was always into it.
Yeah, because you hear that on this one especially, and how did you do, let's say that one, So Many Bees? I love that one. I don't know, that's kind of my I love that sort of,
Oh,
a
great.
little bit outish vibe, but like, what was the approach there?
Well, the funny thing is, it's a similar approach that I use for all things. I have little bits and pieces that I eventually just find a way of piecing together. So I kind of got these. I love those kind of expansive Americana, kind of Copland-esque kind of chords, with fifths, and
Yeah.
I like that sound. So I've been playing around with some of those, and then I'd been messing around with the electronics thing, the Ableton thing, so you can add all sorts of. I'd added like wind chimes and all sorts of things to it, to that sound. So I had that, and then I had this idea about bees, because that was actually true. That was one of the I think people are. I've seen a couple of reviews of the album. They've interpreted it as some sort of horror film. It wasn't a horror moment at all. It was quite beautiful. There was a lot of bees around because the weather was glorious.
Yeah.
Thankfully, in the first lockdown, and we were in the countryside, so that was really nice to see. So yeah, no, I see in those anyway. So I mean, it was inspired by that, and I just tried to improvise in a bee-like fashion, if that's possible to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Ableton. Will you use that also live now, or have you been using it live?
I've been trying it a bit with my partner. My partner has a new project, which is a really lovely project called Returning Weather. It's all about she's Irish, and it's all about coming back home and all this kind of stuff. It's lovely music that she's written for it. And we've only done it once live, but we have a tour coming up in March, and I'm using some sounds. Yeah, I'm gonna have like the laptop there, my guitars, and play around with a few sounds, using a little MIDI keyboard for some of it, and different things, and samples and all sorts. Yeah, so it's kind of ongoing. Yeah, I'm very slow with it. I haven't figured out a way to actually do my own gigs with it. I'm not very good at one-handed guitar player. It's not so good for me. But
Yeah.
somewhere down the line, I'm interested. I'm certainly interested. I think I would need to work with somebody who's more in that thing, to get me more into it, actually. So yeah, that's something I'd like to look at sometime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite a world if you jump in. I'm so afraid of doing that, because then I think it's like effects. You start messing with that, and then it's just like you forgot about the guitar playing. It's just like, we'll go nobble on that, and
I know what you mean. I mean, it is like that. But for me, it was a great thing at the time, because, I started composing and really hearing music in my head again, because,
yeah,
it had been such a long break, really, and I'd disconnected from it quite a lot at the time. So it was great for me. I started to hear all sorts, and I was kind of practicing with it as well. I was playing different ideas and recording all sorts
yeah,
of things and seeing what I liked, and I just chopped all sorts of bits and pieces up and put it together, really, for a kind of. I see the album as kind of a collage of what was going on at the time.
mm,
So. Um, yeah, so it was really good for me to do it, and I learned a lot,
yeah,
and I mean, there's some terrifying things on there as well, that I mean, I remember realizing that I could play a few notes and then just have it turn into a whole orchestra. I don't know how I feel about that, but for my purposes at the time, it was fun to play with it.
yeah. That's funny. Yeah, these electronics. But you
Yeah,
you you mentioned composing, and how do you approach
yeah,
composing usually? I know you've composed stuff for the Partisans. I mean, I want to dig into that later, but
sure.
your own stuff, and you've written a lot of music. Like, what's your process there? I mean, even now, if you compose, well, how do you start? Where do you begin? And
Um, Actually, if it's, I'm actually quite a slow composer. I mean, over the years, I've written a lot of stuff, but I don't regard myself as prolific. I have friends who really are prolific, and they write
mm,
every day and all that kind of stuff. I've never been like that. I really have to have a project, to be into. But I do kind of a weird thing. I write, before I even try the music bit, I write notes, and I just think of all kinds of different vibes that I want to get. It might
mm,
be I might have been. I did something years ago called Six Strings and the
Yeah, I
Beats,
love that
and
one. Yeah, yeah.
oh, thank you. And it was for string quartet and guitar trio, basically. And I remember taking myself off and just writing down all kinds of notes, like I'd heard something I liked in Ten recently. So the first tune ended up being based on that. And I'd actually been to see Dave Holland's band live, and
Mm.
I remember there was a groove in Ten, and as it was going on, I was kind of working out the grouping because it was unusual the way the 10 was put together. And I remember kind of having that as a basis, so that would have been a little note. And I was really into an African singer called Umu Sangare at the time, who's fabulous. So I transcribed a bunch of that,
Mm.
her singing, and that influenced another piece. I did a mathematical thing with chords where, based on nine note scales, just harmonizing nine note
Oh, wow.
scales.
Okay.
Uh, so it just gives you one extra note, really, but it's amazing how much difference one note makes, and you suddenly have some kind of quite tangenty chords that don't quite lead to the obvious place. It's quite an interesting basis.
Mm.
Um, so, various things like that. I just write all these notes and then I just try and fiddle around with it. I mostly do it on guitar, actually. Um, but it's never the same. Sometimes I get the melody first. Sometimes I get a few chords. It usually takes me absolutely ages to get the first thing. But as soon as I get the first thing, then I'm
Yeah.
kind of off. And, then it's all problem solving from then, and it's just a fairly logical thing of just trying to complete something and make it concise.
Yeah. Yeah. No, these notes taking, this is a good one. I'm asking because, sometimes also I'm like very much project based, like, okay, I have a tour coming up or a record, and then I need a ballad, and then just how to write a ballad and where to get the ideas from. And I think that's a nice one, just to write what you want to create. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems to help me. I don't know. I'm just trying to think if I ever do anything else. I mean, it's usually really influenced by what I'm listening to at the
yeah.
time. I never try and, copy anything, but I can get really inspired by just a simple, like a tiny small element of
I know what you
something,
mean. Yeah.
you know, just give me the spark of an idea. And then it's quite, I kind of get excited once I start, but it's a real chore for me to start. I'm terrible with it. I do anything rather than do it. You know, I I watch Netflix or anything I think, oh, I've got to write four tunes for this tour, and oh no, and but once I get into it, it seems to come quite fast, which is
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah, no, it's a good one of listening. It's like you mentioned Black Sabbath. I know. I mean, I'm the same. Like, you would listen to Black Sabbath, and you would suddenly get an idea in fifths, or power chords, or. But of course, you would make
Yeah,
a 11/8 rhythm out of it, or something that's more different in a
yeah,
sense.
sure,
But just the
sure.
initial idea would be like, oh, okay, I got this power
Yeah, that's
idea.
amazing. I mean, you can get ideas from anything.
Yeah, yeah,
It's yeah,
yeah. But
absolutely.
yeah, but you mentioned Black Sabbath, and and your liner notes for your last one say, like, mention Chopin, and they mention John Zorn, and which kind of really describes you well, because it's really like, when I listen to your projects, it's covering a wide range of musical influences. But when you were a teenager, I guess mid 80s or late 80s, what were the jazz-wise the influences, or like what got you
Yeah,
excited for
no,
jazz guitar, especially?
yeah, I would. Well, my dad was a musician, so
Oh, okay.
I mean, the thing that actually got me into playing was just being into rock music at school, and suddenly, I started to kind of discover music. When I was around kind of 9 and 10, and I can
Okay.
remember. being in like we're talking, late 70s, early 80s. So I would have been listening to things like Blondie and all this stuff in the charts, and then when I got a little bit old enough to actually do something, I was a bit kind of retro then. I was into all this rock stuff that I'd kind of missed the boat with. I'd missed it by a few years, but I wasn't really into my generation's Human League and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Wasn't really for me. So I was looking, I was into David Bowie and I was into Black Sabbath, and I was into heavy metal bands, but I wasn't an out and out metaler. I was also into the Beatles, and I was
yeah.
into all kinds of things. So, but my dad was a clarinet player who was a semi-professional musician, that
Mm.
used to do gigs, and he was very into Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw, and that's the kind of music that he wanted to play, and used to be out doing stuff like that. But he had his record collection was more modern,
Mm.
and I mean, it's like if I guess it's interesting to talk to you about this. I don't really think about it, but when I look back on it, everything's always eclectic all the time. So it makes sense, really, that I ended up like that. Because he had a real surprising array of things, from Big Spiderbeck records through to like John Sermon records, and stuff like that. But the first two things that really got my attention as a jazz musician was Barney Kessel.
Mm.
Um, he had some Barney. He had a Barney Kessel record called Just Friends,
Hmm.
and I still love the record today. It was him with, I think they're Swedish musicians, and he plays basically standards on it. But it's a great record, live record. So that really caught my ear, and I think the bluesiness was the
Yeah.
connection between the rock music. I love Jimi Hendrix as well, and I was listening to that. So and Led Zepp. So there's such a connection with the bluesiness instantly for me. And then the one that really freaked me out was Miles Davis. He had it on vinyl, and the vinyl was called Live in Europe,
Mm.
but it's actually the Antibes Festival.
Oh yeah.
So it's with George Coleman and the early version of the '60s quintet,
Quintet.
Autumn
Yeah.
Leaves, classic version of Autumn Leaves at the start. And that really freaked me out, that record. I didn't know what was going on, but I could not get enough of it. I couldn't stop listening to it. And, you know, so that really, after that, I was kind of, I was heading for the jazz, direction, really. I fell in love with it.
That's a road downhill then. Just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, no,
Yeah. Should have stuck with the Bowie records.
exactly. But what about the jazz guitarists? Did you then, like from Barney? I mean, did you do like the entire route, kind of going through Wes and like then later to the fusion guys, and or
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this would have been simultaneous with me having lessons with John Richards,
yeah?
the session guitar player. So it was great because he'd actually studied with Barney, but
Oh, really? Wow.
I was living in the English Midlands at the time, and I'm from a small industrial town called Derby, but he
Hmm.
lived in a nearby town which is called Burton-on-Trent, and he actually had a guitar shop there, which is how I discovered him and got lessons with him. And he was the house guitarist with the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time, um, which was kind of all in the same nearby area. And the amazing thing about his shop was he had all these American books, which it's hard to imagine now in the era of internet, but they were actually very, very hard to get hold of in Britain at that time. Unless you lived in London, maybe you could get things, but without going to the big city.
Mm.
So that was great. So like, So I just did everything. People were making me tapes. I mean, it's amazing how generous people are when you get into music, you know.
Yeah.
Older music fans and musicians, they give you copies of things and they tell you about things. And so I was just doing everything possible, you know. I was going from Eddie Lang to Wes Montgomery, and then I'd be looking at John McLaughlin. Somebody gave me My Goals Beyond with
Oh
Joe
man. Woo.
Loft.
Yeah. That's
I love that record.
yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
I actually think that's still some of the most modern guitar I've ever
Yeah.
heard, harmonically. Actually, I think
With
it's brilliant, that
Sermon.
record.
That one. What's the other one? X.
Oh,
Oh,
Extrapolations.
yeah, man. Whew.
Yeah.
Tony
Well, that
Oxley, I think,
really
on drums.
influenced
Man.
Partisans, actually.
Yeah.
Tony Oxley, yeah.
Yeah.
That really influenced Partisans, that band, big time.
Really?
Yeah, it was a huge influence on us, that record. We were all into it, yeah. I'll come back to that. But yeah, anyway, I just got obsessed with just trying to get my hands on anything I could. So, you know, I fell in love with, I mean, my favorite Wes Montgomery album was Full House, actually.
Yeah.
Was really, oh God, I mean, I can't even, it's so much music that I got into at that time. And at the same time, with the Winton thing was just happening. So I had those first Winton albums where literally as they were coming out, I was rushing in to buy those
Oh, cool. Yeah.
records. Um, I'm trying to, and I was obsessed with Miles, so I got every Miles thing ever. Um, yeah, guitar wise, I just went through everybody. And Jimmy Rainey, I loved. But I was listening to Joe Pass. Yeah, God, and Pat Martino, I started to become aware of. And then I was getting towards more modern players, you know, but I loved everything.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't really say I had one favorite, but I always went back to Barney. I always thought Barney was fabulous. But I was very lucky. I met him twice actually, which was brilliant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I saw him play once in my hometown, which was incredible. And I got to meet him on one of my first trips abroad when I was playing with I was still very young, but playing with the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, and we went to Portugal, and he was there with an incredible array of musicians that were doing a Abersold summer school. It was incredible actually. It was Art Taylor was there. God, it was Terence Blanchard.
Oh, wow.
Um, Oh God, it's too early in the morning. There was some fabulous musicians there. But yeah, that was brilliant to meet him twice, you know, and yeah. I
Amazing.
don't think he was enjoying the summer school, but I introduced myself to him with another guitar player. I used to share the big band gig with this friend of mine called Andy Jones, and we introduced ourselves to Barney, and he wasn't into doing the Abersold thing, I don't think, too much. But he said, "Are you really into jazz?" And I told him I knew this album and everything, and some of his poll winners things and stuff. And
Yeah.
he took me and Andy aside, and he literally gave us a private concert. He played for 20 minutes, just solo guitar.
Wow.
I mean, it was incredible. And he went for it like you wouldn't believe. He was sweating. He was hitting open strings sometimes. I mean, it was such an honor to see that, you know,
Wow.
amazing thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's always been my hero, I guess, you know.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't think of that when I hear you play. I would not actually
No,
hear that one in your playing. Interesting.
I guess not. But actually, if you look kind of outside of the soloing thing,
Yeah.
I love accompanying, you
Yeah.
know. Um, so actually, you can probably hear it more in that than the soloing, I think, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I do play things in thirds sometimes. I can't do it fast like Barney, but you know, I try and play a few of his little fills and things for singers and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's in there somewhere. It's all in there.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll focus more on your comping just to hear it actually to see where it is. But you mentioned the Partisans and the Extrapolation album. How did that band
Yeah.
happen with Julian? You know, it was, I think, quite an important band considering this what was happening in the UK in the mid 90s. So what was the story
Yeah.
behind the Partisans?
Well, I actually met Julian, who was the co-leader of the band.
Yeah,
It was a band that was, you know, with myself, Julian Siegel on saxophone, and we were the co-writers of it. And then it was Gene Calderazzo, who's a brilliant drummer from
yeah,
New York, who'd recently moved to the UK at the time, was living in London, and a great musician and bass player called Thad Kelly. And I'd actually been living, I think I met Julian doing the National Youth Big Band actually,
mm,
um, jazz orchestra, and I was living in a house with him, dreadful house in East London with no inside bathroom. It was an
oh my
outside
God.
toilet. It was kind of a jazz monastery. It was very cheap rent and very tolerant neighbours. We had an entire band in there. Julian actually used to play bass a lot in those days. At the
Oh really?
time, he was yeah, he was kind of finding out who he was, and he was almost doing 50-50 at the time.
Wow, okay, I didn't
Uh,
know.
which he decided and he made a choice in the end, and he does still play bass, but only really for fun. But at the time, he was doing gigs on it. So there was another tenor player that lived in the house called Martin Dunstan, and a drummer called Phil Allen, who was a brilliant drummer. And we needed a bass player, so Julian got the room. It's a four-bedroom house, and we just played night and day. We became super close friends, and we were just listening to. I mean, I can remember discovering Transition. You know, John
Yeah,
Coltrane's Transition, good, and almost like you know, discovering it together. We were almost hiding behind the sofa. It was so terrifying when the penny dropped, how amazing it was. You know, I think we both got it at the same time. So it was great fun, you know. No, it was a short period, but we played non-stop really. And we started to, you know, we started to form groups with different people around that time. Um, and then we went separate ways house-wise, and you know, actually, one of us got a girlfriend, and the house was all over.
yeah.
No, no woman would, in their right mind, would have gone in that house. But yeah, we all started to go separate ways. But myself and Julian then looked seriously to form bands, and I think that's when we both started to really write music as
Mm,
well. Um, and it just evolved from there, really. And we wanted to do something that kind of had all our influences. And he's a bit like me, he likes all kinds of things. Um, I mean, he grew up listening to lots of big band music, actually.
mm,
His father was really into Count Basie and that kind of stuff. So he grew up with all that, but he's also really into classical music. He actually studied conducting and clarinet
really?
playing,
Oh,
and so he's very diverse as well. But we formed a band, but then the band kind of, I mean, it was in existence for 23 years, which is
wow, really? Wow.
a really long time. And you know, it really mutated over the years. I mean, basically, it became, I don't know how, it wasn't my idea, but it became a complete democracy, you know, and everybody seemed to have a say in the music. Um, Beyond anything Spinal Tap could ever imagine. Uh, and you know, but it was great actually. So the other guys in the band, although they didn't write music, they had a you know a huge impact on
Yeah,
the editing of the music and the shaping of it and the grooves and all that. And it gradually got more electric as it went on,
yeah.
um, and ended up being quite a kind of electric band. But it started off as kind of like a very ornate influenced
Oh,
band. We wanted to play lots of time, no changes, and kind of really open forms, and we were also simultaneously watching those. We'd seen all those Dave Holland bands, like extensions and all that
yeah, I
stuff.
love that stuff. Man. Yeah.
Literally, as it was happening, we were watching all that at Ronnie Scott's and obsessed with all that. So it was and we were into Schofield and Lovano and Paul Motion Trio, and we were just trying to put our influences together, really.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you still like that stuff, like this kind of Ornette vibe? Do you still want to do something like that in
Oh
that
yeah.
direction in the future? Or...
Yeah, I mean that would be nice actually. I mean, yeah, I'd love to. I would love to do that. I do. I love that music, and I love Dewey Redman. And Julian was a huge Dewey Redman fan, and I love that record. New York Is Now, actually, with the
Yeah.
two
Woo.
of them. That's a fabulous record. Um, yeah, you've given me an idea there. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to go in that direction. Yeah, I love Song X actually as well. I
Oh,
think
that's my favorite
perhaps
Martini album. If now, when I was younger, I was like into that more still life talking vibe, the popish. But
sure
now that's the one with the Ornette, man. Woo.
it's
That,
brilliant. But I love Rejoicing as well,
yeah.
and he plays a lot of Ornette tunes on that, and also 8081 is great.
Oof. Oh,
Dewey's on that, so they're all connected. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be a really nice thing to do, actually. Yeah, thank you. You've given me an idea.
Okay. No, it'd be nice to hear you, like in this more open, free context blowing. It's uh, quite cool,
Yeah.
actually. But I wanted to ask you about, I mentioned Screenwash in the beginning, that this was, I think, the first one where I heard you. And how did
Right.
that one happen? It has like the most, the best possible rhythm section imaginable. It's hard to say the best, but one of the best with Billy Hart and James
Yeah.
Genus. Like, what's the story behind forming that album, and how did it happen?
Um, well, sort of around the kind of 97, myself and Christine, my partner, started to go over to New York on a regular basis. And um, actually, the very first person we met when we got there was Billy Hart, and we
Really?
went to see. Yeah, we went to see a gig at Cleopatra's Needle, which was, more of a kind of venue on the scene back in those days.
Yeah.
Less of a kind of jam session that it, I think, may be now. I'm not sure. I can't really say, but and it was Marc Copland trio with Drew Gress and Billy, and we just couldn't believe it. And it was just, and at the time, I remember it's a big circular American sports bar kind of thing. And I remember all these people watching this football match on one side of the bar, and then us and a few people watching this incredible trio on the other side. So the situation was so bizarre that it was very easy to meet the band. So we got talking to Billy, particularly, and he foolishly said to us, well, if you ever want to do something, call me, and call it naivety or just the optimism of the era of our optimism. But we had that kind of real crazy beginner's good luck when we first went to New York. That the next night we saw Kenny Kirkland and Genus was on
Oh
that
man.
one. So we were just seeing one ridiculous thing after another and thinking, wow, this is New York like this every night. So yeah, we met a whole bunch of people, and anyway, long story short, Christine actually recorded an album first and asked Billy to do it, and
Oh, okay.
he did. It was called Deep Song, and he recommended a young saxophonist who just brought out his first album, well, certainly on a big label of this world, which was Marc Turner.
Oh yeah,
So
Marc is on deep. Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah.
yeah, so Marc was on that, and a friend of ours called Peter Herbert, who's an Austrian bass
Yeah.
player. Um, and so it kind of went from there, and I wanted to play with Billy again. I mean, who wouldn't? And somehow a friend of mine mentioned James Genus, and I remember thinking at the time, oh no, I couldn't possibly call him. I mean, I was, uh, and I just did call him, and it's strange. I got on with him like a house on fire from the minute I met him. Um, and we remain friends ever since.
Oh,
We've been really good friends. And we played when I was living in New York. I used to try. I mean, he's very busy and he's in
sure.
Herbie's band, of course, and traveling around. But he would always. I used to do gigs with him at the 55 bar, and
Oh,
he's a very very good friend of mine. So yeah, that's how that came about. And then I wanted to record it, so I went back to New York and recorded it there. And Marc plays on a few tracks on
yeah,
that, Marc Copland.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful one. I mean, it's your debut
Oh,
as a leader, right? Under your name.
no, there's one before it actually called
Oh, really?
Impish.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
and that's with
Uh,
a great bass player, English bass player called Dave Whitford, and a brilliant Israeli drummer called Asaf Serkis.
Circus, yeah.
And the late, great John Taylor plays on some of it on piano as well.
Mm.
So that was actually before Screenwash, but they're very
Okay.
close together, like less than a year apart, I think.
Okay. That's why I got it confused. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about New York also, because I know you moved later to New York and lived there for some time. Uh, what was that based on? I mean, how did you decide to do that? I mean, I guess you moved back to Europe right somehow in between COVID, or but
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex story, but well, with the New York thing, it was something we'd already always wanted to do. We actually tried to do it in 2003,
hmm,
so that would have been shortly after that time when I was making those records,
yeah,
and my New York connections were becoming more and more. I was kind of playing a lot in London with New York musicians, and um, it was becoming a real regular feature of my life. And I used to go over there whenever I could. So we tried to do it, but for various reasons we couldn't make it work at the time. It just wasn't meant to be. And then we both got quite busy where we were and got distracted and kind of left it and just put it down to fate, thinking maybe it's not meant to be, we'll stay where we are. Um, but I ended up doing in 2014 a North American tour with Partisans actually,
ah, really?
and we went.
Oh,
Yeah, we played in the States, and we played up in Canada. Um, did a whole bunch of stuff there, and we played at Dizzy's in New York,
oh, wow.
and I
Interesting.
kind of got the bug for it again, and I came back and I said to Christine, I don't suppose you want to try that New York thing again. She was like, yeah, okay. So we did, and we were there for 5 years, but it's a long story. But we sort of started. We had Christine's mum died, and I had a tiny bit of money saved up, and there was a little bit of money left over from the sale of Christine's mum's house. And we thought we should invest that in something. So we found a place in the countryside in Ireland that was more meant to be more of a long-term project, and somewhere that we could come over to. Um, but we were realizing it's a very damp climate here, a lot of moisture in the
Mm.
atmosphere, and we were realizing that the house people to be in it more, otherwise we were going to have damp problems. So we were actually starting to spend more time here. So at the beginning, just before the pandemic, we'd decided to kind of basically do a half and half thing with New York.
Oh,
That
okay.
was the plan, and spend like more time here, um, and just do like that. But you know, we were incredibly lucky that we weren't caught in a rent contract, and the pandemic began, and we could see what was happening. I
Yeah.
mean, we had no idea how long, of course, but we could see it was an emergency, and it was like being in a bad sci-fi movie, being in New York. So it was a no-brainer to leave New York, and we had this place, thankfully, which is kind of a fixer-upper place. In you know, you can it was up and running, and it's fine, but there's plenty of things you could do to it. So it made perfect sense to come here, and when we realized what was happening. But of course, like everybody else at the time, we figured 3 months,
Yeah.
6 months, 6 months maximum, go back to New York, find a new place to live there. And this was the thinking. And of course, who knew that it would be 2 years,
Yeah.
and by which stage we'd got really, really into it. Completely changed lifestyle. Absolutely love it now.
Yeah.
So here we are, and we didn't go back. But I still want to have connections there, and I met really very close friends. I just toured recently over here actually with Jed Levy, who was a
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
saxophonist,
Stefan. Yeah.
composer that I had another co co-led band with in New York. So we just played over here in September. We did a tour, and we did some gigs in the UK, and some stuff in Germany and Ireland, and so still lots of connections with New York, but I haven't really. I went over in February, and I was there for a couple of weeks. I'd had to kind of evacuate, so I'd left stuff with a lot of friends, which I felt terrible about, because I thought it was only going to be for a month or so, and my poor friend Marc Lewandowski had a guitar and all sorts in his tiny apartment, for 2 years.
Oh my God.
So it was long overdue for me to collect all these bags and things I'd left there. But he was very kind, so I managed to go and get all that stuff.
It's-
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's quite cool. I mean, yeah, it's this COVID, yeah, changed many things. But on the other hand, the quality of living, if you compare Europe and New York, I don't know. I love Europe still.
Yeah, me too.
It's
Me too.
especially
Um,
Ireland. It's so beautiful,
yeah,
man.
I mean, it's interesting. Oh, it's gorgeous. Yeah, it really. I mean, that was the thing that got us through the whole thing. We were very lucky to be in a beautiful place,
Yeah,
and even when you couldn't go, it was very strict here, actually, much
yeah, no, yeah,
stricter than a lot of places. But even when you couldn't go very far, we were enjoying just being. I mean, I'm looking out my window now. I can see all the fields and stuff. So it's very nice.
beautiful.
Um, But it's like back to where we started the conversation. That thing, portrait in extreme. I always did like all these different things. I do love big cities,
Yeah,
but I always did like this country thing as well. I was always into it.
yeah.
So for me, it's not as weird as it. Some people keep saying to me, "Oh my God, how did you cope leaving New York and going there?" But I mean, to me, it's quite natural.
Yeah.
It's not that weird.
No, no,
Just a
huh?
different thing.
It's a different thing. Yeah. I mean, I also live in the countryside and like 5K out of the center. And I think the older you get, the more I appreciate it, like as a living environment, at least it's uh, interesting.
Are you in Slovenia? Is it?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Where are you?
I'm
Oh,
like
right. Well, I'd love.
Graz, where Graz is in Austria?
Yeah, I was there teaching recently. Actually, I was there a
Ah,
few weeks ago.
really? Ah, wow. I'm like half an hour south of Graz in Slovenia. So,
Right, okay. I saw Yuri Pukul when I was there. He
Oh yeah,
was he
yeah,
was
yeah.
hanging
He's
out there.
yeah. He's in Slovenia. Yeah. I mean, yeah. You should come over. We have a
Yeah,
guest
God,
room and
so you're
everything.
very near there. Okay,
Yeah, come over. We have a
great.
guest
Well,
room
now I know.
and everything. So drink
Great.
wine and eat good and play music. So
Sounds good to me. Sounds
yeah.
good.
But
Yeah.
Phil, I just wanted to ask you also about. I saw that you played with Kenny Wheeler, and when was that, and how was that? I'm probably Kenny is one of my top three favorite composers and musicians, and I wanted to ask you about your experience with him, and when was that? Because I couldn't find any records or something.
No, sadly, it's not documented. But I mean, he was he was a really integral part of the London music scene. I went to the Guildhall School of Music, and when I was in the big band, Kenny came in as guest a few times.
Oh, okay.
So that would have been the first time I got to play with him, which was amazing for me at the time because I was just discovering all those
Yeah,
records,
that's
like Dear One and all those ones, and fabulous. So that was brilliant. And then actually, the first time I got to sort of play with him and really play with him, if you know what I mean, was
yeah.
with Christine actually, and it was a continuation of the thing she'd started with the record. So she managed to put a tour together in England with Billy Hart, Peter Herbert again, and Kenny was playing
Oof, man.
and it was really incredible. Actually, I've never forgotten it because I mean it's quite an art form to play a horn behind a singer anyway, um, but I've never heard anybody do it so brilliantly, but play so much. He played so much behind Christine. But it worked brilliantly. It was amazing. I wish it had been documented.
Ah, shit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy that it wasn't actually, but I think quite often when you do these things, you think, oh, it's going to be ongoing, and then somehow it just doesn't happen again. And there probably is some bootleg of it out there somewhere, but who knows?
Mm.
But I remember doing those gigs, but that was brilliant. And I did a few plays with him around at his house. I remember one time going around and he'd written all this amazing new music, and I thought, wow, that's great. And we were the guinea pigs for it, myself and a few friends, and that turned out to be all the music for Angel Song.
Oh my God, really? Oh shit.
So
Wow.
yeah, played for all that. He was still thinking, oh, do I like this chord? And he was still changing it, which is mad when you think about it. And
That's beautiful.
what else? And I did a tour with him actually as well, with a kind of large ensemble, his all playing his music, which was brilliant.
Wow.
So yeah, I got to play with him a few times, but I wish it had been more, and I certainly wish I'd recorded it, but yeah, stupidly I didn't at the time.
But with Christine, like I did this interview with Steve Swallow, and I asked him, him and Carla are like both, amazing composers and musicians. And it's funny when you talk to Steve, he's like, yeah, Carla is the composer, and I just noodle around, and then he has like all
Yeah,
these compositions from Either Down, Two Away, and which are amazing. And
oh,
but
he writes
yeah,
brilliant. Yeah.
how are you guys with Christine? As two musicians, do you talk about music like when you do your own projects, when you compose, or like how does this go?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we're talking about it at the moment, for this thing she's got coming up in March, which is she's trying to make that bigger than just a straight music thing. She wants to have mixed media elements in it, and
Mm,
because I mean, she's taken all these beautiful photographs of all these kind of ruined houses around the
mm,
countryside, which is a weird feature of the Irish countryside. It's quite spooky, but these abandoned tiny old houses and things, and you know, she wants to incorporate things like that. But you know, Christine writes on piano, and that's been great for my guitar playing actually, because um, nearly everything she writes, I can't play what she's actually written. So I've had to get, you know, develop skills where I can keep the vibe of what she's written and the
Yeah.
quality of it and the kind of aesthetic of it, but obviously adapt it to guitar, which usually means losing a few notes actually in the voicings, because she likes very rich harmony. Um, so that's been really interesting for my playing, to do that. You know, I've learned a lot from that. But it's strange. We write really really different music, but we have a
Yeah.
lot of things that we love. You know, we have a lot of things in common that we both really enjoy. Um, you know, all kinds of music, and she's very diverse as well. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What about you? You
But we
mentioned
do talk about music. Yeah.
Yeah, that, it's funny, like musical couples. Like I'm really curious if you know each one of you composes and if you interfere or help each other. It's uh interesting area actually. So
Yeah, I run ideas by her. I mean, she's got, you know, good taste. So if I say to her, do you think this works? Which is better? You know, sometimes I do that. I say, which do you like more, this version or this version?
yeah.
So it's handy. Yeah, it's really handy, and she does that kind of thing with me as well. Yeah.
It's like Schofield, you know, who asks Susan for the tune titles always.
Oh, is that right? Oh, that's brilliant.
Yes, so many
Very.
times. Like, yeah, what is this one? Yeah, green tea. Okay, green tea. I love that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I never knew that.
you
That's
told
really
me
cool.
once.
That's great.
But Phil, you mentioned like Christine's project, and for March, what about your plans as a band leader? Do you have something new coming up next year, or are you writing some new stuff? Or
I do. Well, I don't have anything set at the moment, but I'm certainly going to do something very. I'm actually, because I'm in a new place, and unfortunately lost that 2 years where I couldn't go out and meet people. I'm kind of at that stage here now where I'm seeing what's going on here, and meeting people all the time.
Mhm.
So I wasn't quite ready to do anything just yet. And I was doing this thing recently with Jed, so a lot of organizational energy went into
Sure.
that. So, but I'm absolutely going to do a new project. I'm just at the moment there's too many sweets in the shop, as they used to say in England. I'm too tempted by all these things. There's a lot of really, really interesting music going on in Ireland. There's very interesting crossover things between, you know, the worlds of like contemporary classical, for want of a
Mhm.
better term. Um, Obviously, their amazing Irish folk music tradition, free improv,
Yeah.
jazz, you know, rock music. You know, there's very interesting crossover things, and that's kind of in a way the territory I might go. But there's also some, you know, fabulous just jazz players. So I haven't quite fixed on what I'm going to do next, but I'm getting there. I'm definitely getting there soon. You know.
Fantastic. Yeah, looking forward
Yeah.
to hear some new music. So
Oh,
nice.
thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, cool. Phil, I'll let you go.
All right. All right. Yeah, I can finish my toast.
Yeah,
Go and
that's
finish.
why it's cold now, so and hard. And
Yeah,
but
great.
thanks so much, man, for taking the
It
time.
was really,
Appreciate it.
really nice to talk to you. Hope to meet you sometime
Yeah,
in
if you're